Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Nightlight. Tonight's really a cool show. We have some very, very enlightening people that are going to be on. A long time ago, Patrick and I did a show on the Phoenix Lights, and we had Lynne Ketei on the show with us. And it was an amazing experience for me, and I had read her book, The Phoenix Lights. I had watched the documentary that she had done, and I was amazed at the material that she had gathered. The Phoenix Lights took place March 13th, 1997. It either is or was, or it is at least among one of the most incredibly well-documented mass sightings of UFOs ever. And so tonight we have on the show Lynne Ketei in the second hour, and the first hour we have Steve Lantz, who did the producing of it, who wrote the music that goes along with it, and helped her to correlate all of the material. I think we have Steve on the phone. Steve, is that you?
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, great. Okay, we didn't recognize your number, so let me give the people a small understanding of what you do. He's an amazing man. Steve has personal and professional experience in the arts that cover a broad spectrum, including motion picture and video production, professional photography, architectural design, graphic design, website design, and multi-track recording. His credits include numerous commercials, documentaries, short films, music videos, promotional films, product demos, and training films, and his diverse experience in multimedia spans over several decades. On top of that, just to put icing on the cake, he has witnessed 2 independent sightings, including the mysterious orbs that randomly appear in the greater Phoenix area and across the state of Arizona. And he also has his own production company, Steve Lantz Productions, LLC. And he started that in 2004. Steve, the one thing that your bio does not have, which I'm very surprised at, is the fact that you're also a composer.
Oh,
and the music that you put in Phoenix Lights, as I understand it, you composed, right?
yes, I did actually. I've been a musician since I was 5 years old, and I've got a full recording studio, and I've actually recorded a lot of tributes for Tom Petty, and done other artists like the Rodstad, and worked with a lot of different local artists to record their CDs. So, quite a music background.
Yeah, why is that so missing from your bio? Which to be honest with you, it takes.
I thought the list was getting a little long. And I didn't want to.
Oh no. But I've had the experience of watching a documentary go together, and for those people that don't know what it entails, and I just have my own personal experience. I did not do it, I watched it. But there were 5 tracks, and you put, the music on one track, the voice on another track, the audio, the graphics on another track, and then others, it's 5 or 6 tracks or even more. And it's amazing because in the documentary that you did with Dr. Lynne, the number of people that were interviewed, how many people actually were interviewed during that?
It's hard to say. It's been like probably 2,000 or 3,000 people. I think we had about 25 hours worth of interview footage, which was a staggering amount of footage to go through. Every bit of that footage had to be captured digitally so that I could use it with a nonlinear editor. Back in those days, you had to do it in real time. So you had to sit through, 25 hours of recording and then logging all the keywords for what was being said, because otherwise you'd never be able to find anything and piece things together. So that was a huge task. It took many weeks to get that done. Very tedious.
Well, I know the 2 of you did marathons of interviews, and and digitally recorded all of it, and then had to edit out just the pieces that were most applicable to the storyline that you were creating. I mean, people, I think when people look at stuff like this, they don't understand the intricate stuff that goes in. I mean, you have to take their voices and you have to put them on one of those thingies and cut it just right. I don't know what it's called. And cut the voice exactly where it's supposed to go, and leaving a little leeway each end so it doesn't sound too clipped. I mean, it's an art. It's an amazing art.
It's definitely an art. I will say that it's gotten a lot better since the old days of using what's called an A-B roll technique, where you have two play decks and one record deck. And, those days it was really hard to cut video. If you made a mistake, it was hard to go back, and you could do insert edits, but it just wasn't like it is nowadays. You just didn't have the control. So it's greatly improved, and certainly since the time that we were working on the Phoenix Lights. Now when I shoot something, it's all in HD, and everything, all the footage is individual files, so it's very quick and easy to upload the footage, and it's already ready to go. So it saves a tremendous amount of time.
Well, what really impressed me, I've seen the video a couple of times, and I have noticed that over time, you've gone in and you've changed it and you've altered it and you've expanded it, and you've the last version that I saw, I have to admit I got on YouTube, but it had the children in it, and I mean, this is not a one shot and done. This is something that has had, I don't know how many different lifetimes, but even each time I've seen it, it's been expanded on and improved and stretched, and it's amazing how you're able to go back in. You're able to, fool with the innards so that you can add more material. And is it ever going to be finished?
Well, it's an ongoing story, and it hasn't come to any completion yet. We still don't know what it was that flew over Arizona in 1997. And the official explanations certainly don't hold water at all. And so whatever it was that happened, and in my belief is it was something extraterrestrial in nature, that it could very well happen again. I think if I was going to speculate, that's based on everything that I had read and all the witness accounts and all the testimonials, all the people I had spoken to personally, off camera, off the record too, including pilots. I just feel like this was sort of a test, sort of to test the waters and see. And this is not the only event, by the way. There's been other similar events around the world, similar sightings. And I think that it's really all about testing the water, seeing where humanity is, seeing how we respond, seeing how our military and our government responds, and the official channels that move all the information about the event and how it's handled, and just get an idea of where we are at a spiritual level. Because I think that disclosure, having full disclosure with other races, is not a question of if, it's a matter of when. And I think when is determined by where we are and where the masses are of the planet as far as their spiritual evolvement. Because if we're not ready, then it's likely to cause a lot of chaos and panic and fear. And I think that those who wish to connect with us the most are very highly involved. And the last thing we want to do is to create any kind of fear or panic. So it's interesting to see where the story is going. It seems like we've had a little bit of a lull in these past few years. I had dozens and dozens of sightings leading up to 2012, and then nothing after that.
Wow.
And it's been all these many years, and I haven't had any sightings, and it just seems like we're kind of in a holding pattern. And what I've read from some channel sources, it does seem that we are in sort of a holding pattern for various reasons. But I think that we're getting towards the end of that waiting period, and probably latter part of this year, and next year we're going to start to see some big changes. So,
well, you know, we just hit the 20th anniversary of it, and you know, over the last 20 years, I would say that consciousness of humanity has shifted tremendously. And what I experienced, I saw a UFO in 66 or 67. And it changed my life. It changed my life totally. And I'm finding that in speaking to other people that have had near-death experiences or who have seen a UFO, that, you know, that there's something that takes place within your consciousness that shifts your focus to a more universal understanding of life as we know it. And it happens to almost everyone. I'm not going to say it's absolute, because there were people standing next to me when I saw the UFO that didn't see it, and then others who were frightened of it, and I just wanted to go on board and take a tour. So it's kind of it's fascinating in that those golden globes seem to be what seems to be the precursor to sightings of any sort, whether it's a crop circle or whether it's UFOs. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. Well, the two sightings that I'll make mention of that had a profound effect on me was the first time it happened was in Northern California, and we had just returned home from a spiritual gathering that meets like once every 5 weeks or so. And I went up to my office and I was just finishing up emails, and I got this very loud thought, this voice in my head telling me that I needed to go outside. And I thought it was just my imagination at first. I kept working, and I heard the voice again, and it was much more emphatic. Well, that time I listened, and I went outside and looked up in the sky where I thought that I should be looking, and sure enough, an orb flew over my house, fairly low altitude. My reaction was not of fear or even of excitement. It was kind of like I'm so accepting of them. I mean, I just did my peace love gesture, which is just like holding it, putting your fingers in a peace sign, bringing it over your heart, and then, raising it up and holding out the peace sign to them. Well, as soon as I did that, the orb lit up super bright. It just like powered up, and it just kept going, and it kept going. And the thing was, it happened again about a week or so later. I had the same thing happen. I was in the house. I was getting ready to settle in, watch some TV, and I had that voice in my head again. And this time I listened right away. I thought, oh yeah, I remember this. So I went outside, and sure enough, it happened again. And I'm glad it happened twice, because, after so many years, you start to maybe even question, what happened. But since it happened to me twice, I can't deny that it was real. And I can't come up with any other explanation other than it was extraterrestrial in nature. And I felt that they were part of my space family, to be honest. And I can't think of, I'm a smart guy. I know a lot about aviation. I know a lot about the military. I know a lot about the secret projects. I've done a lot of digging and researching, and I understand, a lot of the things that are going on behind the scenes that maybe most people don't know about. And I know that what I was looking at was definitely not man-made. It was not something that was military. It was not something conventional. It certainly wasn't anything natural. And I've explored all those possibilities too. We interviewed Robert Golka, who was he was one of the pioneers for. He created the world's largest Tesla. What's it called? The Tesla. I'm talking about the big Tesla foil thing.
Oh, the Tesla antenna?
Well, it's I don't know why I'm spacing on it.
Oh, it's a resonator thing. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
You know what I'm saying? It's like very powerful. But anyway, he was actually one of the only people who was able to create plasma, these plasma balls in a lab situation. But even he told us, he said that, these orbs, like the ones that have been seen over Phoenix, are nothing like that. They will sometimes come from a powerful electrical storm, or there has to be some earthly discharge of powerful electrical energy, but you would never see them fly in formation like that across the state and all that. So, looking at those orbs, I thought there's just nothing that you could explain, to explain them away. And it had to be what I felt it was, and it was something extraterrestrial, and these were my space family. So, but that changes you. It just sort of validates that there's something much bigger beyond, what we perceive as being normal on this planet.
Sure, and
there's other races. And,
it expands our concept of home as well.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine the possibilities, and, really what you're trying to do is figure out what is the bigger picture and how does everything fit into it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even in terms of life and death, where does the soul go in the afterlife? Where is the afterlife? How does that relate to the overall picture? Is it in another dimension, another frequency? Does life exist in many different levels of frequencies? If everything is vibrating, isn't that a possibility? And so when you think of it that way, it really kind of helps you to sort of get a perspective. I always remember the analogy of flatland. It's a 2D world, and you suddenly stick a glass in the middle of flatland. Well, they can't perceive that it's a glass or that there's even anything in the glass. All they can perceive is there's something circular that's interfered into their world, and that's about all they know.
Yeah.
So I like to see what goes beyond the circle, and see the whole glass, basically.
Well, you're not alone there. I've not had the honor to see any of the globes, but I did see a saucer, a ship, whatever you want to call it, and I it was so long ago. I guess they're into new models these days, because in 97 it was basically the triangle shape, and it feels that they're moving more and more towards different shapes, and if you look at our cars, you can understand how every generation has their own trademark, so to speak.
Yeah.
Or I do believe that it's interdimensional travel personally myself. And so it's kind of exciting to be able to especially be with other people that have the same understanding that this is a life-shifting, life-changing experience. And everyone I've talked to, and especially and in the documentary, it does talk about how people change. It's either the documentary or the book. So, but how people change their attitude towards life, and how it shifts their focus and shifts their understanding as to what's really important, more than the big toys and the money and the power, more or less the interaction with each other, and the fact that we are one family seems to be the theme that seems to be coming out.
Yeah.
And I'm so
one
glad.
Big universal family.
Right. And I'm so glad that the documentary had to have gone through several different shifts between the first time I saw it, which was probably, oh gosh, it was almost a decade ago, it feels like. And the one that I saw just the other night, you're going, either you're comfortable with, or you're going in the direction of the enlightenment and the spiritual aspect to the whole process, more so than when first Lynne's book came out. Because when it first came out, I remember talking to her afterwards, and I said, all these spiritual buzzwords in there, what's up? And she just laughed at me. And now here we are at the 20-year anniversary, and I reread the book, and it's half of it is into the spiritual stuff suddenly, so that either humanity is becoming more accepting, or she's more comfortable with letting it all out, whatever. Anybody who's going out for this book, read the most current one, because that is, to me, the best of the two. And
Well, I'm sure that she'll speak for herself when she comes on here at 8 o'clock, but she would probably tell you that, yeah, she's gone through her own transformation, over these many years. I mean, since she wrote the first book, you know, a lot of, soul searching and researching and just changing as a person and seeing things differently and realizing there's a much bigger spiritual aspect to all of this. And it's more than just, a UFO sighting, which, I think kind of trivializes a little bit. I mean, I think this is, a precursor to a big shift in humanity, a shift in our consciousness, a shift to a higher way of being on this planet. And I certainly would like to believe that that's true, because I'd like to think that there'll be an end to all the suffering and all the stuff that goes on this planet, all the negative stuff. And just hope that, we will transcend past all of that and become a more advanced society. And I think that's what we're destined to do.
Yeah, I think we're on our way for sure. So now when you met with her in 2004 and sort of decided you were going to create this documentary, that had to be so overwhelming for you with all the material, with all the, and I love the fact that, excuse me, that it was you and Lynne and your mother who trekked all over the place. And what I found fascinating was your mother carried most of the equipment. Now, how did you manage that?
She didn't carry most of the gear, but she did a lot of stuff, and she still does help me on my shoots. She does all of my makeup and hair, and she does a great job. And it's a nice way for us to bond. And she's always been very supportive of me and loves the film industry and loves to be a part of it. And I love giving her the opportunity to be part of it too. So we're having a lot of fun with that. But yeah, it was basically the three of us on a very crowded expedition, loaded with gear, and traveling about. And, Lynne and I pretty much funded this whole thing ourselves. And ignorance is bliss too. When I started out on the project, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. It just kind of kept growing and growing and getting bigger and bigger. And there was more interviews and more interviews. I'm like, oh my God, this is really going to be something. The first cut, I think, was like over 4.5 hours.
Wow.
So, we got a lot of cutting to do here. A lot of people didn't make it into the final cut, unfortunately, but it was a big project. It took me over a year, I would say, from start to finish, from the first bit that we shot to finishing it up in time for we were trying to get it into the Phoenix Film Festival, and we had to get it in by a certain deadline, but we just couldn't quite make it. It was too tight. So we decided instead to have our own special screening at Harkins on Shea Boulevard in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we've had it there every year since. We have special showings there. And, of course, it's been all over. It's been in distribution. It's been on, I've seen it on the Blockbuster new release shelves, which is pretty exciting. It's been in Netflix. It's been on pay-per-view. It's been in different theaters across the country. It's been in other countries as well. So it's done pretty well, and it's won several awards and nominations, including Best Director and Best Picture. And
lots of them. Now, I can't imagine that there is anyone out there that doesn't know about the Phoenix Lights, but just in case there is a person here or there who has not heard, it was a mass sighting of large ships that moved very slowly across Phoenix, Arizona, and the entire length of the sighting took a number of hours, didn't it?
Yeah, it actually started up in, as far as we know, up in Nevada. I don't know if it was in any other states, but generally it kind of started up around Henderson, Nevada, and kind of moved south, went through northwestern end of Arizona and moved down through the central part of the state. Eventually, this mass sighting occurred over Phoenix. It's pretty strange because the witness accounts, the number of craft vary in terms of where the witnesses were. It almost seems like there were a bunch more craft that either appeared or manifested it in some way as they were ready to make this big flyover over Phoenix. And, the craft, most of the craft were described as being at least a mile across or close to it. Most of them were delta-shaped, kind of chevron-shaped craft. There was one that was reported as being circular. It was over McDowell Mountains. They moved very, very slow. We had a number of witnesses who described being directly underneath as it flew over, and as one witness said, it was flying way too slow to stay up, even if it was a Cessna, and and it was enormous. And witnesses say that it looked like it was so close to the ground that they could just reach up and touch it, and it just kept going and going. So that's first of all, when you try to think about what it could have been, or what logical explanation there could be. I'm a licensed pilot, so I understand airspace and airspace rules. There's no way that this was military. There's no way that they would have had anything this big. There's no way that they would have flown something this big, even if they had it, low to the ground over a busy city, right through the middle of Class B airspace without even having any contact with the air traffic controller, who I spoke to personally, and said that, he saw the lights, but, it wasn't appearing on radar, and there was no communication, and they didn't know what to do. The military couldn't do anything either. I mean, as soon as they approached the craft, they basically disappeared.
Yeah.
And that's not military. And obviously, it certainly isn't anything natural. So why couldn't it be extraterrestrial craft? Why couldn't it be? Why are so many skeptics so sure that it's not possible? Like you were talking about a tooth fairy, or something that we know doesn't exist. I mean, there's a vast universe out there, and you can't go by the old argument that, there's too much space to go from here to there. It takes too long to go from here to there. We don't know how other beings are getting around.
No.
We don't know what other methods and means are possible out there. What do we know? We're not space travelers. We've gone to the moon, and all of a sudden we're an expert on universal travel.
Well,
so that argument just doesn't hold water.
No, it doesn't. And I think the other thing that, at least with the one that I saw, there was no noise and there was no air displacement. And if we had that kind of technology, we'd be flying it now, and we don't.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the sightings that I had, they were all silent. I also had a daytime sighting during the solar eclipse in 2012. I was with some friends. We had binoculars. We watched this strange-looking, metallic-looking craft. Well, it looked metallic, but it was kind of glinting. I never could quite tell exactly what it was, because it almost looked like it was only partially in our dimension. I don't know how else to explain it. But it literally, we watched it for a little while, and then it literally went right over our heads. And I mean right over my house, directly over our house. And I had the binoculars on it, and I could see there was some kind of a craft, but it wasn't like completely, like I said, it almost looked like in Star Trek when they go into that clone mode, the
cloaking,
they disappear. Yeah, the cloaking mode. And clone mode. So it was kind of like that. It was kind of like halfway in, halfway out. But it definitely wasn't anything military or anything that I could think of. So, I mean, it's totally possible, and I think that it's just, like I said, I think we're getting to the point in our time, in our calendar here, where it's time for humanity to be uplifted and shifted up into a higher consciousness. And that could also happen from other events like the sun, massive solar flares. It could also cause change. there's a whole lot of things going on out there that that could cause big changes on this planet energetically, and there's no way that we could either stop it, and I would say in many cases even know about it. It's just going to happen. And,
well, there are the progressions of the equinoxes that we're going through here on this planet. There are also progressions of cosmic equinoxes, and once every 27,000 years they coincide together, and we're in one of those time frames now. And during those time frames there is easier communication between the different veils, between the different fields, between the different dimensions, so that something like this happening now within the last 10 or so years, I would say is very common, very understandable. And it wasn't just in Phoenix that this happened. In Phoenix is the one that's gotten all of the attention, and there were like 10,000 witnesses. I mean, it was huge. But there were similar flyovers in other parts of the world in about the same time frame, weren't there?
Yeah, actually, Stevensville, Texas, that occurred right around the time that we had a distributor looking at the Phoenix lights and considering it for distribution. And when the Stevensville sighting occurred, it literally pushed them over the edge. It was like, oh yeah, well this is definitely a big topic now. But actually, the sighting occurred not too far from the Bush's ranch. And there was a very similar type of sighting. And there was also one up in Chicago, sort of south of Chicago, a number of years back. There's been others in other countries too. The descriptions are very similar. Now, just to kind of clarify, we live in a very complicated little universe here. We've got cases where we have actual extraterrestrial craft who are coming here, I believe. But we also have, I also believe that there's the TR-3B, which is a triangular-shaped craft that the Black Ops developed, which is from technology that was back engineered from craft that they had gotten a hold of, and it opens up a whole big can of worms. But there could actually be sightings that we've had over the years that could actually be craft that was developed through the Black Ops. And then there's other races too. There's third dimensional races that have created the saucer type craft, the Zeta Reticulans and so forth. But there's higher beings that they don't even really need craft. They just seem to appear in these orbs. Or I don't know what the orbs are. If it's like a ship or if it's some kind of there's some sort of an energy field. But that would be the more advanced, higher up type beings. So there's a whole variety of different levels, if you want to think of it that way, of different extraterrestrial races, and that means a whole range of different types of craft, and then also we have some of our own mixed in there too. So I think that kind of complicates the whole thing. People might say, "Oh, all this stuff has got to be the TR-3B," but then if they're going to admit that, then they have to also admit that there's a lot of secret stuff going on. It's like, well, if they have a TR-3B craft, why isn't that being used for the benefit of man? Why aren't we using that as a means of transportation, for people to travel?
You can say that about a lot of stuff.
Secret? I mean, and then is there other technologies that have been kept secret? Because I believe that free energy technologies have been kept secret for a long time because, there's too much money to be made by those who are in power. They certainly don't want people having free energy. But what I don't understand about that is you still have to pay for the equipment. You still have to pay to have it installed and maintained and upgraded and all that. There's still a huge industry in that, even if it does produce free energy. So,
well, I mean, look back at Nikola Tesla. I mean, he wanted to give the free energy away, and Edison had a meter. So guess who won? But
yeah, you always follow the money, and you find out that that's a reason that we're still driving cars. I mean, I think about this a lot when I'm on the road. I mean, we have technology, we have the means for people to travel without having the problems of accidents and people getting killed in accidents all the time. It can actually be done in a much more advanced way. Our transportation systems are very out of date, and I kind of laugh when I see. I know the space shuttle is a very sophisticated thing, and I don't want to downplay it, but the idea of going up into space using any type of propulsion is really archaic because there are so many other means of doing that. And the type of technology, even with the lower, like even just the races that are a couple hundred years ahead of us, is that they seem to be able to oppose the gravity of planets and use the gravity of planets to move through space. And so they don't really need propulsion. They can basically levitate silently just by opposing the gravitational fields and creating their own gravitational field. And that also explains why they can do these incredible maneuvers without being squashed like bugs, because they're in their own electromagnetic field, and basically, you don't have that issue. So I think there's a lot to be said for a lot of technologies that unfortunately, have been kept from the public domain, and we're kind of stuck back in the old days. Even though we think we're all modern and technical, because we got our cell phones and all that, and yeah, those are great. But we should be much further down the road as far as free energy technologies. Also, huge advances in medicine with technology that can heal people by aligning our energies, literally making it impossible for cancer to grow. It's all energetically based, but all these technologies have been kept from the public domain because those who are in power are making too much money the other way. So,
well, yeah, I mean, they've been using the Tesla energy with cancer patients, and they've been finding that it has been amazing. If you look at the Bosnian pyramids, they found that the tunnels underneath the Bosnian pyramids are so full of highly charged negative ions that people who go in there with allergies, with illnesses, and even some with cancers and spent time down there have come out cured. So that there's a ton of stuff that's coming out lately that is just amazing that I don't think the governments can control. And I think that's what's going to happen. These discoveries are going to just absolutely overwhelm the government, and they won't be able to contain them any longer. I know that there is so much stuff that is being totally kept from the masses as a whole, and it's corporate entities that are doing it, and at some point in time they're going to lose control, or things are going to get so out of control that they will slip, and once they slip and people start to know the facts, then they're done for. So I think it is we're coming into a time frame like that, and it's going to be very interesting to see just how much truth comes out, not only in this country but in other countries as well, so that it's a matter of people waking up. And I truly believe the sightings of UFOs, and there haven't been that many lately, and there was a channeler, no, it was Billy Meyer, I think, that said that most of the extraterrestrials, almost all of them, left the planet in 97, which I find interesting because that's the time frame that coincides with the Phoenix sightings. So I'm wondering if that was their goodbye tour. But,
well, I was only for temporary. I don't think they've ever really gone away. I think that there's some more negative ETs that were here, kind of a rogue group who were kind of running a show and manipulating the Illuminati and the people who were behind the scenes. And they left in the late 90s honoring their original agreement, but apparently the Illuminati forces decided, rather than put on their white hats like they were supposed to, they continued on with their abuse of power. But I think their power is slowly coming to an end, and I think that there are a number of things that they've built in their institutions that are starting to crumble and losing their money base. And they're, I, for one, really look forward to the day when all of this can come out and people can learn the truth about, and for example, I think that there's a misconception that the people in government are like keeping secrets, that they know what's going on. The truth is, most of our elected officials in Congress don't really know what's going on.
No, that's true.
Not any more than the average person. They don't know any more about UFOs. They don't know any more about 9/11 or anything on that end. And they're, if you want to keep things secret, then you make sure that all your minions know nothing. All information gets channeled vertically to the top. The people who are making all the decisions on this earth are the most powerful, wealthy people on this planet. Whether it's you're talking the Bilderbergs, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the amount of money that they have is insane. We're not even talking billions. We're talking beyond trillions. When you have that kind of money, you can buy pretty much anything.
Oh, that's true.
Those are the people who own the companies in the industrial military complex. They're the ones who profit. They're the ones who profit from war. They're the ones who instigate war because that's how they profit. There's no profit in well people. You want to keep people sick as much as possible because they would love to reduce world population. And you have David Rockefeller even so much as admitting that in his bio. There's no denying it. When JFK had his famous speech talking about beware, and especially he was pointing out the industrial military complex and central banking, which, by the way, one of our old presidents back in, I can't remember which one it was back after the Civil War. Also, we had a centralized banking system at that time, which was done away with, but that president warned of us ever getting back into that again. It would be a very bad thing.
Well, I think Eisenhower warned us as well.
Yeah, so there's been warnings from different presidents who know what's going on, but JFK kind of said too much, and I think that's what led to his demise. I think that this was all about the black ops and the Illuminati who really make all the decisions on all these things, but they're very secretive, and they don't. It's almost impossible to connect them legally to anything because they've insulated themselves so well. And it's a game where they've made all the rules, so they know exactly how to stay out of jail and all that. So it's I just can't wait for all this to come out and for people to see the real truth behind everything. And once we can do that, we can get on with becoming a more advanced race. Imagine living in a world where we don't have crime. Imagine living in a world where there's no homeless people, there's no starvation. Everybody has shelters. There's no, the governments are small and you don't have all the corruption and all that takes place. You don't have overcrowded prisons. You don't have all the ugliness of
you don't have prisons.
Instead, we'll live in harmony with the environment, with Mother Earth, instead of just building roads everywhere and, plowing everything down and bulldozing everything down and building parking lots and buildings, we'll be much more in harmony with nature. And imagine what a beautiful place that would be. And of course, I'm talking now about the song from John Lennon, imagine.
That it's funny because that used to be the theme song for my show, and
oh, really?
For years, for 7 years, it was the theme song. But when I came over to this station, it had to be Podsafe music, so I couldn't use it. But Imagine is I love it, the words, and he was obviously someone who saw far into the future. And an amazing man, and again cut off before his time. I guess in essence we all go when we're supposed to, but it just felt like he had a lot more he could have said. But I do believe that there has been mass awakening to the planet over the last 5 years. that people are more and more and more becoming awake and aware, and not standing for stupidity. And I think, our elections are showing it. The fact that there is more upheaval in more places on the globe, because people are standing up for their rights, whether it's just to have just to be allowed their own free will. And it's, free will is something that we were gifted with, and that's part of what makes us unique to this planet anyhow. And to be able to have the sight to see where our free will can take us is something else as well. Where there used to be just these little boxes that everybody fit in, that's not the case anymore today. There's not a lot of little boxes. There's one big box, and you're allowed to find where you belong. And now this is causing a lot of problems with a lot of people, but everybody is able to look for, the what about me? Where do I take this? Where do I take my life? What do I do with my life? And it's important to not just survive, but rather to celebrate.
Well, another way of putting it is a lot of people are disconnecting themselves from the Matrix. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite movies, some great hidden messaging in that movie is if you haven't seen The Matrix, you should definitely see it. There's a lot of really good messaging in there. But really, it's taking the blinders off. There's so much information that's available. You kind of have to be discerning when you look on the internet. You kind of have to go with your gut feeling on things. But there's plenty of information out there. If you want to take the time to study, I find that a lot of the skeptics that I've spoken to over the years really don't take the time to read or study any of this stuff. They just kind of have a knee-jerk reaction about it, and they form an opinion about it, but they don't really back it up with anything. And I think some people just don't they want to tune it out. They really can't deal with it. They're trying to get through their busy lives. I look at some of our friends that are just so engrossed in their jobs, and they barely have any time for themselves. They've got family, they've got kids, they've got schedules, and it's just absolutely crazy. And they can't think beyond, what they've got to do that day or the next day. And so to start thinking outside the box in a spiritual capacity it's just not something that fits into their lifestyle. And so they can't handle thinking about these kind of big topics. But I think that it's important that enough people do, because we're trying to get to the point where it's at the tipping point of consciousness for humanity, where we can finally tip it over to where we can have that the big upgrade in our consciousness and have a whole different society here. On other planets, it's nothing like this. We have a tremendous amount of diversity between positive and negative here, good and bad. So it's a great place for souls to come and learn and to gain a tremendous amount of soul growth and learning on this planet. Whereas like one or two lifetimes here could be the equivalent of dozens of lifetimes on other planets, because they just don't have the diversity and the opportunities for lessons that can be learned through the positive versus the bad. We have an understanding of death is here. Other planets, they do. They can easily communicate with those who have left the physical, and to them, there's no such thing as death. It's just, but here it's a very final and, sad, horrible thing, And so there's a lot of spiritual growth and soul growth that occurs through loss, death. And so that makes kind of an unusual place in that way too. So I don't know, but I think that there's everything kind of runs its course, and I think that Earth has reached the end of a long era of like 13,000 years of having allowed, I should say, to sort of drop down into the lower 3D vibrations and having these extremes of good and bad and evil and all of that. but I think we're getting to the end of that period, and it's time for us to awaken humanity. I think there's a lot of new souls here. It's interesting when I talk to kids, they're so open to life on other planets, and it's almost like no big deal to them.
Oh yeah, but you got to understand something. First of all, I taught school for 25 years, and I am older than you, so I've been through that period of time where education and religion and all of these were set in stone. There was no way you could question. There was no way you could debate. There was no way you could, in any way, shape, or form, go outside of the lines that they drew for you. Now, yeah. I mean, I'm looking back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And the 60s, the lines started to, kind of get fuzzy a little bit. but it wasn't until probably the 80s and 90s where people were really looking at the element of spirituality being something that was not instead of religion, but it was alongside of, it was build upon and go further. And it wasn't, religion wasn't the law. It was a philosophy. And spirituality is another philosophy that in many ways takes us to another level, another dimension, another aspect of understanding our purpose and our reason and what the destiny of humanity actually is. And it's an exciting trip. But for many people who were, older generations, that was not something that you looked beyond. That was heresy. So, so we are no longer getting burned at the stake, which is a good thing. And I like that. But we're getting close to the top of the hour too. I want to let you know that when the music plays, we'll have about a 3 to 5 minute break. And then I'm gonna bring Lynne on. But I want to have you back again, because I would love to really go further with your philosophy on where life is going, because I think it would be a lot of fun to go much deeper into it if you're open to that.
I can go very deep. Believe me, we barely skimmed on the surface on this show, but I just hope that people will just keep an open mind. Don't get too caught up in the whole human rat race. You got to kind of get out of it sometimes to get a greater perspective on things and realize that there's a much, much bigger universe that we're part of, and that there are big cycles that, that cause change, that we have, either we're not aware of them, or even if we are, there's nothing we can do to stop them. Mm-hmm. But it's just coming to accept that, I'll throw out a couple of sayings here. There's a couple of good things to leave you with. One is that, we are spiritual beings having a physical existence here. Okay? We're spiritual beings having a human experience. The other saying, which I love, and I'm not sure who coined this term, but it's one of my favorites, is that we never die. It's just the scenery that changes.
That's true. But let me throw one in too. We are who we've been waiting for.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
that's definitely a good one. And we are the ones that we're waiting for. I mean, we also can't expect that other beings are going to come here and solve all the problems for us. We have to meet them halfway, and we have to reach a certain level of involvement before we can really start to see changes take effect. It's kind of like taking a kindergarten student and trying to throw them into college. They're just not quite ready for it. So, we kind of have to think of it that way. But I think we're all high school students now, ready to graduate and go into college. And it's a whole different experience, especially when you can have open contact with other beings from all over the universe, having the ability to travel very easily, not only around this planet, but the other planets in our solar system and then outside of the solar system. And how cool would that be? And all the technologies that have been kept secret will suddenly become available to us, which will totally change our lifestyle. None of us will be sick anymore. It's just there's so many advantages to to moving on. We'll never have to sit in traffic again.
well, you know,
never have to sit in a traffic jam again. I look forward to that one. And
okay.
and also people will have the ability to do meaningful things, and
Yeah.
there's no waste of time.
Now, we have our second half, which is going to be just as exciting as the first half, I promise you. We have Dr. Lynne Ketei with us, and her firsthand experiences as well as her amazing photographs are considered by optical physicists and experts in the field as historic. After 13 years of meticulous research, she has combined stunning data and personal interviews in the Phoenix Lights documentary, a comprehensive examination of the strange lights seen over Phoenix and throughout Arizona on March 13, 1997. This groundbreaking documentary is based on her best-selling book, The Phoenix Lights, A Skeptic's Discovery That We Are Not Alone, and it features dozens of credible eyewitnesses, local military personnel, former Phoenix Vice Mayor Francis Barwood, and university-based scientists and other experts who give compelling testimony to the reality of these mysterious global visitations. What were they? How did they affect the witnesses? What do they mean? And I recommend everyone to read the second edition of the book, the new updated one. Or the third edition, whatever it is. Read the latest edition of the book.
You got it.
Because she comes out of the closet and goes into much deeper material. And I accused her of avoiding it when the first edition came out. So do you remember that, Lynne?
No, but actually the publishers wouldn't put it in. I wanted to put the new data that I'm sharing for the first time in the 2017 edition, the third edition of the book, and they thought it would confuse the public. I thought it was really important because it's actually what prompted me to come forward and really verified for me that this is all real and needs to be shared. So I'm thrilled that I can share it for the first time. And also, I've been actually studying this phenomena up close and personal since 1995. So it's really 22 years that I've been involved with this topic. And after thousands of people saw what I had been not only witnessing but documenting on 35 millimeter film for 2 years on March 13th, 1997, when thousands of people, if people that are listening haven't heard about the Phoenix Lights mass sighting, on March 13th, 1997, while thousands of people were outside looking up to the sky purposely to catch a glimpse of the Hale-Bopp comet, which was very clear in the northwest sky, they also caught a glimpse of mile to much larger. In fact, I just did a conference with the head of the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington, Peter Davenport in Oregon a few months ago, and he said, and he's had thousands of reports, that one of the craft, and it wasn't just one, by the way, which we'll get into, but one of the 10 different craft that people described statewide and beyond was actually 8 miles wide. So we're talking about something that is just so phenomenal. I mean, I can't even conceive of that myself. But nonetheless, on March 13th, people were seeing these orbs, these balls of light that seemed to be attached to something or at a force field holding them in rock-solid formation, massive size, totally silent, or actual craft. And if you're near a computer, you can go on the Phoenix Lights Network website, www.thephoenixlights.net, and it's packed with information to explore and consider. But if you go to the photo page, you'll see the 35 millimeter photographs. But if you go to the GAP page, it's the Geospatial Animation Project. And by the way, the whole website was built by Steve Lantz, who also collaborated with me on the film. He is brilliant and talented and just a very, very special person. We were so lucky to have him involved with the Phoenix Lights. And the GAP page, Geospatial Animation Project, is a 12-year compilation of thousands of reports from the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington, Arizona MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, as you mentioned, the former Vice Mayor and Councilwoman Frances Barwood, who was the only elected official that actually asked innocently for an investigation months after the mass sighting, was just plastered by the media. It was very scary to come forward. I stayed anonymous for 7 years. You mentioned I came out of the closet. I came forward in 2004, but nonetheless, also Village Labs, which was collecting hundreds and hundreds of local, they were computer lab here near ASU, Arizona State University. And after 12 years of compiling the data, Michael Tanner, who is now deceased, and Bill Hamilton actually discovered that if 2 or more people saw the same thing, there were 10 different craft that people were describing, and they're very different. If you look at the illustrations that are beautifully illustrated and the animations by Larry Lowe, they're very different. Now, whether it was one craft that could morph and look different, or from their perspective from where they were standing, or a parade. And that was what the bottom line was, that ultimately the investigators deciphered was going on, because there were multiple things going on at the same time in different areas. That's one of the main reasons I came forward after 7 years of anonymity, to set the record straight. Even till today, 20 years later, there is so much mis and disinformation out there. It wasn't just 1 or 2 events on March 13th, 1997. It was many events, starting actually for weeks before. And that's something I'd like to get into if we can, because there is so much more data than just March 13th. And people that just focus on March 13th are losing, they obviously haven't looked at the data, because for weeks before, actually 2 months before, I actually captured the same exact phenomena, straight on, the mile-wide phenomena, head-on, turning into a V. And it was so unnerving that I called around the next morning, found air traffic controllers at Sky Harbor International Airport who saw the same thing at the same time over Class B restricted airspace. There's a 30-mile radius around the center of the airport, and anyone that goes into that airspace, especially 1,000 feet altitude that these lights were, must call into the tower, and no one did. So they got very nervous, and they looked on radar, didn't show up on radar. They took their binoculars to look, and what they described were 6 points of light, totally equidistant from each other, massive span over a mile wide, that seemed to be attached to something, but they couldn't quite see what it was attached to. And you would hear this again by thousands of people 2 months later. And one of them was a meteorologist and said that the entire thing turned as a unit against the wind and then elevated slowly and moved in synchrony behind South Mountain, which is just south of the airport. So when I asked, well, what was it? There was silence. And then one of them said, beats me. I said, you're air traffic controllers. You're supposed to know it's in our airspace. They ruled out every conventional aircraft, flares, Chinese lanterns, even skydivers with lights. And we kept in contact, and I continued photographing these anomalous light formations that were really compelling. They were huge balls of light, up into and including March 13th, when I also captured, to me it was just another night, but I also captured the same exact phenomena in the same exact location. Again, but this time I captured the 3 endpoints of a giant V or triangle, and which the air traffic controllers confirmed the next morning as also being in Class B restricted airspace while I was filming it. Well, what's very interesting is that this is like a grand finale around 10 o'clock, and it's very important to know this data because, as I mentioned earlier, the sightings actually started on March 13th, and there were other people that were also photographing them for days before, as I was, at 3 p.m. that afternoon, and daylight sightings. And at 5 o'clock hour, they were seen in New Mexico by Native Americans, at 7 o'clock hour in California. In fact, there's a report that I have in detail in the book of a commercial airline pilot with 140 passengers, and there was also another airline pilot at the same time that were seeing one of these mile-wide craft covering Las Vegas. This is the 11 o'clock hour, and their story was really amazing too because they were kind of warned off by the military. And then at actually 3 a.m. the following morning, there was a call to the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington, and we have part of that recorded report that's very detailed, very professional, from an alleged crewman who said that one of these mile-wide silent craft, was hovering right over central Phoenix at 8:30 that evening, and military jets were sent out to intercept it, get gun camera film, which we heard that they did. As they approached, the lights started to dim, and there were civilians that saw this, by the way, and confirmed that this happened. And these jets had the afterburners on as they were coming closer, and the lights started to dim, and then the entire mile-wide craft just disappeared and blinked out. And the crewman said that he was one of the people to help one of the pilots out of his aircraft because he was so shaken up by it. And then the last report that I know of, after 20 years of working diligently on this investigation, is actually a Boeing crew, and one of them actually told me this personally, that were coming into work at Sky Harbor International Airport, and one of these massive craft was hovering over their tarmac. So it wasn't just one or two events, it was many, many events. And when you look at the technology, it was mind-boggling, because besides the fact that it was so massive and still staying in the air at rooftop level, I mean, we had many witnesses say that they could have thrown a rock at it. It was so close. And even in the documentary, we have a pilot and we have other people that were an artist that was right underneath one of what they would call a canister of spinning energy. The light was self-contained. It didn't reflect out at all. And some people even saw these orbs detach from the main object, go out into the environment, and then redock with it. Others saw it take off at blink speed without even dispersing the air. If you look at the GAP page, again, the Geospatial Animation Project page, one of the crafts split in two and then shot up in the air. I mean, we're talking about technology, Barbara, that's 20 years later, and we haven't seen anything that comes close to this technology. So, what happened on March 13th is pretty amazing. And once thousands of people saw what I have been documenting, and again, the very first sighting that my husband, who's also a physician, and I had, and we had no interest or knowledge in the topic at all, was 2 years before the mass sighting. And I bring that in because we saw this up close and personal. We saw these orbs. Actually, they were oval-shaped objects right in front of our face, right outside our bedroom window. And I captured 35-millimeter photographs of them, which are posted on the Phoenix Lights Network website on the photo page. So I had wondered for 2 years what this advanced technology was. And then when thousands of people saw what I had been seeing, pushed my whole medical career aside to try to find a logical source and meaning for what I had witnessed and photographed, and I have yet to find it. If anything, it opened up a whole new world to me, and ultimately, after 7 years and 750 pages later of incredibly credible data, I literally pushed my medical career aside and really did the homework, not only for myself, but ultimately as a scientist, as an educator, as an experiencer, and certainly as a physician, to let people know that they're not crazy, because it's not a mirage, because most things can be explained, most anomalies can be explained, but a small percentage cannot. And just because we don't have the technology yet to definitively define what these things are, it doesn't mean they're not real. So it's time we get this topic out in the open, we address it, we accept it, and we study it so we can find out not only who's driving these things, but also move forward in our own evolution. And I just caught the tail end of your visit with Steve, and I know you got into the whole spirituality thing, and that's part and parcel of this. And that's to bring up your beginning statements, that was very difficult for publishers to understand when I first decided to come forward and shared my book with Simon & Schuster and Random House and Time Warner and all the big names, HarperCollins. Every single one of them said, there's two books here. There's a UFO book and there's a spiritual book. And I said, wait a minute. You don't get it. That's the point. The Phoenix Lights. And we can get into all that and how the story unfolded, really woke people up to not only their presence in a very gentle, non-threatening way. There hasn't been one in 20 years, and this is important too. There hasn't been one credible report, of harm, threat, or abduction associated with the phenomenon known as the Phoenix Lights. And that's very telling in and of itself. But they just didn't get it, that it was so important that everything had to be shared together. It wasn't two books, it was one book, and that's the point. The Phoenix Lights not only wakes people up to, and they're happening worldwide, by the way, and doing this in other countries, and they've been doing it for centuries, to their presence in a non-threatening way, but also to who we are as human beings and the spiritual beings that we are and the positive potential we have to make this a better world. And that's, something we can get into because they affected people at a very, very deep level in real time and long term. Now I'll take
absolutely.
a breath.
No, absolutely. And, it was almost 10 years ago that you were on Patrick's show, and we were talking about the Phoenix Lights. And I think I called you the next day and I said, come on, the spiritual stuff is here. And then you gave me the same explanation that you just gave me. And when I reread your book, it was like, okay, so she's finally, opening this door, which is so connected, because in my experience, when I saw a UFO, it changed my life forever. And you were also, we also interviewed you for the show that we did on near-death experiences and how that changed people's lives forever. And so the purpose, among other things, of the slow-moving parade was that it did something to the consciousness of everyone that saw it, and it shifted and changed their life forever. And it's amazing how the purpose was probably just to, I think that truly that there is some sort of telepathy that we get from these objects, and it's at such a deep level we don't necessarily hear it with our ears, but our spirit hears it. And
well, you brought up a really good point. You brought up can I interject, or are you finished? Yes?
No, interject.
Okay, because that is a really important point here, because even in real time that was happening, and people did get telepathic messages, by the way. A couple I shared in the book, but it's amazing how we're so inundated with threat, and harm from these. There's another movie coming out this month, actually, which supposedly is based on the Phoenix Lights, which is, really sad that Hollywood takes a benevolent sighting like we had and really twists it into abduction, threatening alien type scenarios, which are not true. It's totally fictitious and it's horrifying, and that's what we've been having so much in the media and Hollywood. And 6 months before the mass sighting, interestingly, the movie Independence Day was really popular. And children were usually the first ones to see the Phoenix Lights coming towards them, the mile-wide V formation and jumping up and down, Independence Day, Independence Day. But as it got closer, like you said, a calmness came over everyone, a connectiveness to the phenomena that the kids wanted to run after it or have their parents get in the car. And there were a number of people who said that they had telepathic messages that were given to them not to worry, that they weren't here to harm us. I mean, there was real communication going on. I mean, that doesn't happen, and plus the fact that the after effect was so profound. That doesn't happen with flares or balloons or conventional aircraft. And interestingly, long term, people went into the peace movement, went into the environmental movement. I mean, really, to this day, I'm still getting emails and messages on Facebook if anybody wants to check out the Phoenix Lights Network Facebook page, which also we have lots of updates on there, as well as a website. And to this day, it has changed people's lives. And you also brought up another interesting point, Barbara. There were also a number of witnesses who had near-death experiences as children that was reawakened by the mass sighting. And I found that really powerful because I did too. And as you know, I go into my near-death experience in the book, but what was really hit me, it was like, oh my goodness, maybe there's a connection between all unexplained phenomena, whether it's near-death experience, out-of-body experience, or unexplained aerial phenomena that have a mystical light associated with the experience. And lo and behold, when I started looking again, I mean, there is so much data, credible data out there if you really look and search it out. at the University of Connecticut, called the Omega Project by Dr. Kenneth Ring years ago. I mean, this was like a 4-inch book. And Dr. John Mack at Harvard, the Peer Institute, was a Pulitzer Prize winner. Unfortunately, he was killed in a car accident in Europe when he was lecturing over there. Right after, like 6 months after my first presentation, right even before I came forward, a month before I came forward in March of 2004, I presented in February at the University of Arizona Tucson Medical Center with Dr. John Mack, and he was just writing a book about this very thing, about not only the connection between all unexplained phenomena, be it the experience itself, and I lay it out very simply in the book, but the after effect is so profound, the awakening, the connectiveness that a person feels to the universe, to the earth, and to each other that they've never felt before. I mean, it changes people forever in a positive way, a positive transformation. So I started calling all unexplained phenomena, UP, and up, because it is an up. And he also was coming to the conclusion that whoever is doing this is really trying to wake us up to the spiritual beings that we are. And the message is loud and clear. And for all experiences, as you know, Barbara, near-death experience as well as contact, to wake up to what we're doing.
Oh, absolutely.
To ourselves and our planet before it's too late. And people come back with all these, from all different kinds of up experiences with the same message. So there must be something going on there.
Well, I think, yeah, I totally agree. And it seems to me also that it takes us from our perception of ourselves on this planet, and it's kind of like it's almost as though we envision ourselves in a single level house, and suddenly there's a wake-up call and it says, hey, you're only in the basement of a skyscraper, move up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost as though that door was unlocked, and as is appropriate for each individual, their spirit started giving them more and more and more information, and greater insight and greater appreciation of the trip they're taking, the trip that we're on. And I know Steve did say we are a spirit on a human experience, not a human on a spiritual experience. So the spirit within is sort of celebrating when we even acknowledge its existence. And once we do that and we embrace it within our lives, then our lives change dramatically. And I really, really believe that all of these experiences that people go through, and even the people that were standing next to me when I saw what I saw and didn't see it, I'm sure that something was triggered inside of them that 20, 30, 40 years later, there's an aha moment. Because I really believe that the awakening is taking place, but for each individual in their own time and way.
Absolutely. That's the most important thing. First of all, as far as the awakening, you don't have to have an up experience, an unexplained phenomena experience, to have that awakening, by the way. I mean, if you really come with it with an open mind and an open heart and start looking at the data, it's amazing how you will start appreciating the serendipities. I don't believe in coincidence anymore. There's so many coincidences that happened after the mass sighting and paranormal experiences that I have come to believe that there are no coincidences. But that's, each person has to find that out on their own, as you mentioned. And it is, I say all the time that the Phoenix Lights, it's like whoever's doing this had it with the military and the government. They're taking upon themselves to touch one person at a time. And it's how that person interprets it and how much that person, look, everybody comes from a different background, from a different upbringing, from a different belief system, different worldview. Some people can't deal with this topic. Some people don't want to, and that's okay. That's okay. Everyone in their own time. But the data, the credible, compelling data is now out there. That's why I had to come forward and, let people decide for themselves. And after I came forward, I actually had gone back to work to help put our younger son through medical school. He's a neurologist now. He's also in the documentary. He had a couple sightings with us of the Phoenix Lights. And I was chief clinical consultant over at the Arizona Heart Institute here at the Wellness and Imaging Center. And interestingly, when patients would come from their heart test to see if there's calcium in their heart arteries, main heart arteries, they would sit down. And the first thing I would say to them is, this is your container for your lifetime. And they would look at me. And they would say, wow, I never thought of it that way. And I would say, whatever you put into it or not is your choice. But there is a formula to staying healthy. And then we would go into the wellness and nutrition and all that good stuff. So, we're right on the same wavelength here, Barbara. I mean, it really is amazing how once people do start to wake up and start to notice that there is such a wondrous, wondrous universe out there, that we have been so ingrained in a reality cube that it's starting to almost explode. I mean, now that there's so many sightings and the internet is there to share everything in split second in real time, more and more people are realizing that, whoa, we are not alone.
Well, yeah, and I think the other thing that I found fascinating is that while someone may have had an experience like this, they will deny it and say, I didn't see anything, it doesn't mean anything, and yet their life will still change. Whether or not they believe what changed it, their life will change. There will be a better, a greater sense of being one with humanity and sharing and loving and giving and I can remember at one point I was serving in the pulpit of a spiritualist church, and I decided that it would be fun to spiritually baptize everybody with roses. And so one man came up and he said, I don't believe in any of this. And I said, that's okay, I do. And, and he just looked at me and I said, if you feel better, that's the only thing that I care about. And he said, well, I do feel better. And I said, well, then either you ate well this morning or magic is happening or spirit is awakening, but you choose whatever it is. And if you want to blame breakfast for feeling good, that's fine.
Well, you're right. It is a choice. It is a choice. And I have to say, just interject here, too, that with the Phoenix Lights witnesses, I would say that, I haven't met one that hasn't said this, okay? And they seek me out, and that's the other thing. It's really important to share your experience at least with one person. If anybody's listening out there and they've had an experience, it's scary to come forward. I mean, people, there's so much ridicule and discrediting, and boy, it is rampant more and more. Let me tell you, with the 20th anniversary, they've been coming out of the woodwork. But be that as it may, if you share, it is very cathartic. If you don't share, it's not healthy. And that was another reason I came forward as a physician, because it festers. And just to share with one person, and I'm always available. It might take a little bit for me to get back to you, but if you want to go to the website, thephoenixlights.net, there's a contact button. It goes right to my email, or if you want to message me on Facebook, Phoenix Lights Network Facebook page, just sharing with one person. I take confidentiality very seriously as a physician, is really healing. So that's important too. But anyway, the people that had the Phoenix Lights experience, I have to say, and it really, it just keeps being reconfirmed to me year after year. It's not a believing anymore for these people. It's a knowing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I think, the one thing that I was, now my sighting was in the 60s. Which really dates me, but and the ridicule that I got was just amazing. And I finally said, I would say to people, look, I know what I saw. You don't have to believe me if you don't want to. If you're going to ask me stupid questions, I'll answer them, but don't ridicule me because you don't get the answer you expect. I saw what I saw. And I know.
I have to tell you, yeah. I have to. Yeah. If I didn't have the 35 millimeter photographs that I've had extensively analyzed and authenticated at university and military level, I couldn't be talking to you right now, Barbara. Not only was it very precarious to come forward as a medical doctor, certainly, especially at that time, although we came a long way from 97, where it was really, really difficult to come forward. I mean, and it still is. I mean, there are people out there, for whatever reason, that do not want this information out there. And they will do anything to discredit the messenger so people don't listen to the message. But nonetheless, the material is out there. And now, with our documentary, besides the book, which is now in its third print, and as I mentioned, every time the book comes out, I share more and more of data that I never thought I'd share. But it really is exciting to share the new data. And the documentary, which has won over a dozen International Film Festival Awards, I was starting to mention when I was at the Arizona Heart Institute and finally came forward. And I have to tell you, nobody knew what I was doing behind the scenes. I mean, I was taking the 750-page journal the 3 years that I was working at the Heart Institute, and because I went back to work to help with Dan through medical school, and I was editing down the 750 pages to the most credible data that I had discovered or documented, and ended up with 250 pages. And once I came forward, I have to tell you, I had more doctors and nurses to take me aside to tell me their experiences. They were thrilled that somebody of credence finally came forward to say it's okay to talk about this. And then I was contacted by filmmakers, one of which was Steve Lantz, and he had graduated from the Brooks Institute of Photography, which was one of the places that I went to have my data analyzed. And he was very persistent. And I said, first of all, I stayed anonymous for 7 years. I don't know if anybody else would want to come forward, and especially the university professors that I was working with, because they could lose their grants if they even mentioned the word UFO. And besides, I said, I was working 7 to 7 at the Heart Institute doing radio programs like this into the night, and Borders and Barnes & Noble tours on the weekend. And he said he was coming into Phoenix to visit his parents. His dad's also a physician, with his equipment, and we were going to start filming in June. And I said, whoa, let me get this together. I don't know how I can do this. And I started contacting the people, because I really didn't think anybody would want to come forward. And every single person except one who came on later said that they would gladly do it. Plus the fact, and this is what really got me, Barbara, I was invited by a couple of parents to a middle school here, which I could not believe they would even let me in the door to talk about this topic. But I walked in to 200 middle school students and parents and teachers. You could hear a pin drop. They thirst for this knowledge. And it was the first time I realized that there is nothing, absolutely nothing in our history books about this topic. And I asked the crowd, I said, does anybody believe that we're alone in the universe? Not one hand went up. And I said, does anybody believe we are not alone in the universe? Every hand went up. And it was like, whoa. I mean, that so convinced me that something was needed visually as kind of a gentle overview to get this out there in a very gentle, non-threatening way, just like the Phoenix Lights themselves, to wake people up and to give them, credible data, seeing the witnesses talk about it, seeing the experts, including astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was in the documentary, who was being conferred with. I didn't know till I interviewed him. He was actually being conferred with by some of the investigators here while it was happening. And he says some amazing things. He's also in the bonus features, which are pretty amazing as well, talking about the cover-up. I don't go there in the documentary, but he does. In the and he was the sixth man to walk on the moon, and he actually came back. Talk about spirituality. He came back a changed man, and actually formed IONS, which was combined spirituality and science. He was the founder of spirituality and science, and you have to really give him so much credit. He just passed recently, and he's so wonderful in the documentary. We also have other wonderful experts, a 911 police operator who was on that night, who came up to me after a presentation. She said, I heard that the Phoenix police said that they didn't get any calls or got very few calls. I said, that's what they said. She says, well, I just retired, and I'm here to tell you we got hundreds and hundreds of calls. And she's pretty amazing in the documentary, as well as pilots and military. So once we started filming in June, the next thing I know, I mean, it was just so overwhelming, and I had to make a choice, and ended up leaving the Arizona Heart Institute, which I hated to do, but I haven't looked back. It's just been an amazing, amazing adventure. We've won over a dozen international film festival awards. Steve is so talented. I mean, it was just the two of us working on this film. We could not have done it without the participants, of course, which are amazing, and a number of them have passed, and I'm so glad that their voices will be heard forever in the Phoenix Lights documentary. But we are so proud that they've won over a dozen international film festival awards, and it keeps evolving, like the book keeps evolving. So it is a documentary, and we just released the latest edition called The Phoenix Lights Beyond Top Secret, and we keep adding to the bonus features, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, people have really been touched by it, and even, as you mentioned, I mean, there is a transformation that happens when you learn about it, and when people watch the documentary, they come away with a totally different, view than what they started.
In many ways, what you're doing is providing another awakening for people that didn't see it. But I think one of the things that impressed me the most was that in 1977 there was a great movie out, and it was called Close Encounters of a Third Kind by Steven Spielberg. And in one of the scenes, there's people waiting by the side of the road for these little objects to come swooving by. And what he did was he took all of the designs of UFOs that people had given, and they're all there. They're all represented there in his film. And the one line in the film that really touched me and moved me tremendously was at the very end. He said, this guy has to be allowed to go because he was invited. And seeing a UFO makes you feel like you've been given an invitation.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I've had people say to me that they felt blessed, and have felt blessed ever since, that they had the opportunity to see the true unknowns. And other people say, oh my goodness, I wish I had seen them, and I want to see them so badly. And I always say, keep looking up. I mean, there's so many things in the sky now that we're not sure what they are, and those can be explained. But nonetheless, when you do have a true paranormal experience, a true sighting, you know it. And we're getting into all this, which is really fascinating. The other aspect, and I didn't even go into and we don't have time to go into how the story unfolded, which in and of itself is fascinating. But this part is really important too. As I mentioned, I don't believe in coincidences anymore. 6 months before the mass sighting, and so the audience knows, I have dedicated my life's work for over 40 years to community education of vital health issues. I started with NBC doing health reporting in '76, and syndication grew from that. And when we moved to Phoenix in 1980, they were already showing the syndication at CBS station here, and then I started working with NBC here in Phoenix, doing health reporting, and then at USA Cable, when that was getting started, a show called The Great American Homemaker. I was their health consultant with Vicki Lawrence. She was the hostess, and also seeing patients in the practice that were drowning in substance abuse. Adolescent medicine is my specialty, and wanted to do something really productive to wake them up, and also entertaining, and brought in my other hat, which was professional musical theater, and have celebrities in the videos that I produced on AIDS and teen pregnancy and substance abuse, from Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and the original cast from Beverly Hills 90210 and Paul Abdul and so forth, to give poignant messages of the reality of vital health issues. So when this fell in my lap, I have to tell you, I've been doing this for 40 years, I really felt obliged to do the same for this vital issue, and that's how this has all come about, number one. And number two, I am now working on not only a curriculum for the last 5 years for schools on this topic, but we just released the Phoenix Lights, UFOs, and Crop Circles graphic novel coloring book, Adventures of Sue, F-O, Field Observer, and Hugh, H-U-G-H, Hugh, F-O, and he's a little alien. And there's a graphic novel throughout the coloring book. It's 150 pages is the black and white one, and 160 pages for the color edition of amazing data, the 10 different craft pictures that are really iconic pictures that we use for the history, and 80 crop circles and games and puzzles are all available. All three things, the book, the Phoenix Lights of Skeptics Discovery That We Are Not Alone, as well as the documentary and the graphic novel coloring book, are all available on Amazon if anybody's interested. But it's for all ages, the graphic novel coloring book with games and word puzzles and all kinds of good stuff. And so now we have the trilogy happening. But getting back to presenting my substance abuse program at the Gila Bend Indian Reservation 6 months before the mass sighting. I was invited to present there. They have one school, and I presented to the school, and I helped them out a bit. They don't talk to outsiders. And what makes this really interesting is that 6 months later, after the mass sighting, I was noticing, and if you go to the photo page on the Phoenix Lights Network website, you'll see the data speaks for itself. The same exact phenomenon, by the way, are in the same exact location 2 years before the mass sighting in the close orb pictures, which we didn't notice, but once we had them analyzed, and that's in a whole other story by Navy optical physicist Dr. Bruce Maccabee. Not only did he notice that the same phenomena was there in the same location 2 years before, and it's right there in the pictures, but he also noticed something else that was very strange, is that we thought it was a couple of minutes. He noticed that the skyline proved, and he did a whole 21-page report, that it wasn't just minutes, it was hours in between the first and last picture, and presented the case in 1999 at the MUFON International Symposium as the first authenticated, as far as we know, the only photographic evidence of missing time. But that's another little tidbit that I'll leave with your audience that I share in the book now. But anyway, getting back to the Gila Bend reservation, if you notice that in all the pictures, these phenomena keep showing up, where South Mountain, which is just south of the airport, intersects with the Estrella Mountain Range, which is a few miles back. There's one picture, the first picture that I have on the photo page shows that topography. And the Gila Bend Indian Reservation, very sacred ground, is in the basin in between those two mountain ranges. So I called them up, and I said, did anybody happen to see strange lights on March 13th? And they started to giggle. And I said, is that funny? And they said, are you kidding? We've been looking up at them for centuries. We call them sky people, light beings. It's part of their culture. I had no idea, Barbara. That was the first time I had heard of any of this. And they not only said that the Estrellas got its name because of these phenomena showing up for centuries. The Spaniards of the day either saw these same phenomena or heard about the lore and named the Estrellas, which means star in Spanish, the Estrella Mountain Range. Plus, they believe that there is a portal or a gateway in that area. And again, if you just look at the data, and this is all speculation, but if you look at my photographic data, these phenomena keep popping up in that location. So that may be true, but that's another little coincidence. And if I could tell one more coincidence that has to do with the Phoenix Lights, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of our historic, and it's now become the most witnessed, most documented, and most important mass anomalous aerial sighting in modern history, if not all of history. And what's interesting is this year we're also celebrating the 30th anniversary of a movie that I also played a principal role in, called Raising Arizona. Do you remember that movie, the Coen brothers hit film?
I
Raising
do.
Arizona. With Nicolas Cage and Holly Hunter and Frances McDormand and John Goodman. I mean, they were all just starting out at the time, as well as the cinematographer, who I'll get to in a second. But what's really interesting, I played, for anybody out there that did see the movie, I played the mother of quintuplets. I was Florence, Arizona, and one of the quintuplets was kidnapped by Holly Hunter and Nicolas Cage, because they could not conceive. It's a black comedy, by the way. And after the baby was kidnapped, they had a press conference. Now, I had totally forgotten about this, but a couple of years ago, and I hadn't seen the movie because it was released in '87, since the late '80s, someone came up to me and said, there's a reference to your character and UFOs in the movie, Raising Arizona. I said, really? I did not remember. And I go back and look. After the baby is kidnapped, there's a press conference in front of our home, and they stick a microphone in my husband's face and says, there's a rumor that your son was abducted by UFOs. Is there any truth to that? And the fellow who plays my husband says, please, son, please don't print that. If his mama reads that, she'll lose all hope, which is totally different than my own take. The Coen brothers had a very different take of it. But that was one thing that this was 10 years before the mass sighting, where I became a key witness to the mass sighting. But be that as it may, the cinematographer, who was also just getting started, went on to do Big and When Harry Met Sally and The Addams Family and a whole host of other films. I think when the West Was Won, he ended up creating and directing the series Men in Black, the Men in Black film series that, by the way, the first one opened in 1997, the same year as the Phoenix Lights.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
coincidence?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So I thought that would be a little interesting little tidbit for your audience, because we are celebrating it now. The Phoenix Magazine has an 8-page layout for Raising Arizona in this month's issue of the Phoenix Magazine, and actually last month had a wonderful article about the 20th anniversary, and that's something that really needs to happen across the United States. I mean, the Arizona media has become so open to these phenomena, even though some of the sightings are not, UFOs. I mean, we have sightings that are weather balloons or blimps or even flares, which, by the way, was the only explanation they ever came up with, and it was totally debunked by the military themselves. For anybody out there that heard that it was flares 3 years later, well, first of all, it wasn't flares, the true unknowns, but for anybody that saw it up close and personal, as I did, and over 10,000 people did, right over their heads. But the Air National Guard tried to reenact, 3 Air National Guards tried to reenact the Phoenix Lights 3 years after the mass sighting. And they publicly announced it, and we were all out there with our cameras, and it was a joke. I mean, talk about a joke. And if you go to the news page, which, by the way, was just revised by Steve Lantz, with wonderful reports from the media this year. I mean, they're really a model for what should happen, taking these topics seriously. But if you go to the middle of the page, of the news page on the Phoenix Lights Network website, there's a block that says AZ Family, which is the CNN affiliate. You'll see what their flare drop looked like. And it, like I said, it was just laughable. I mean, they tried to make a triangle. It fell apart immediately. It was upside down. It had huge smoke trails, which is what flares do. Not one witness to date has described any of the flare characteristics. It's quite the opposite. These things were rock solid information. Flares can't do that, and that's been the only explanation. In fact, they've never, the military or government have never addressed the mild to larger V and delta and triangle and boomerang shaped craft to this day. So it's still unexplained.
It is, and we're coming close to the top of the hour, so you can breathe.
Well, thank you for letting me share, because there's so much to the story, and I do hope people pick up the book. There's so much more to the story, as you know, and watch the documentary, and hopefully get the graphic novel coloring book too, because there's some really great things in there to learn more, because there is so much more to this story.
Oh yeah, and the story is not over. I mean, I think that's the one thing that people have to realize, that as more and more unfolds, and there have been sightings for a long time. I have a feeling there are going to be more sightings, so that massive ones, so that it's going to be very interesting to see where this all what this all evolves into, because I truly feel that this is just the beginning of an amazing story, and there's so much more to come. And as it happens, you've revised the video a number of times. This is third edition of the book. I imagine there will be 4 and 5 editions. So thank you so much, both you and Steve. I so appreciate your being here tonight.
And we so appreciate you having us. Thank you so much, Barbara, and keep looking up.
You too.